everyone, this is Marissa from Marissa Rocks It and Designed by Geeks. Did you know that you can use an SVG file without a cutting machine? It's true. All you need is some free software and a printer. If you want to put a design on fabric, you can print the SVG onto iron-on transfer paper. Or if you're a paper crafter, some designs can also be cut by hand. You just need to print the outlines onto the back side of a piece of colored cardstock and then cut along the lines. I'll be showing you how to do all this and more in today's video tutorial. If you are a person who likes to follow along with written instructions, or if you'd like written instructions to refer back to later, I'll put a link in the video description to this PDF file. If you want to download the PDF to your computer, or if you want to print this PDF, just click the appropriate icon at the upper right. This is the icon to download, and this is the icon to print. To begin, you'll want to download the Inkscape software. This is totally free, and I'll put a link where to download it in the video description. The link is also here in the PDF. Once you're in the Inkscape website, you're going to go to Download, Current Version, and then you're going to choose which operating system you use. I use a Windows 64-bit, so I'm going to click the Windows button, and then I'm going to click the 64-bit option. And I'm going to choose to install the EXE format. When I click, that's going to download that software into my Downloads folder. As you can see, it's downloading here at the lower left. It might take a few seconds or it might take a few minutes depending on your download speeds and your computer. But once that's done downloading, I can open the folder where that EXE file lives. And then you double-click the EXE file to complete the installation. I already have the program installed, so I'm not going to install it again, but just follow the on-screen prompts for installing the software. It does take several minutes to complete the install process, but you only need to install the software once before the very first time that you want to use it. Once the install is complete, you can begin using the software. So to begin, you're going to open up the Inkscape software. For Windows users, you can go down to the search bar and type in Inkscape, and then open the Inkscape app. The first time you open up Inkscape, it may take a few minutes. It will also ask you some preferences. I recommend just keeping everything at the default settings, and then you can also choose if you want the dark or the light appearance. I have mine set to dark, but just pick whichever one of those you want and then click Save after you set your preferences. Once the app opens, you're going to choose New Document. And then next, you're going to open up the SVG file you want to use. So you go to the File menu and you go Open, and then navigate to your computer to find the SVG file you want. So I'm going to be doing this gift box SVG design. So I click the file and I click Open. Now we're going to set up our file. So you're going to go into the File menu again, and this time you want to choose Document Properties. That's going to open up the Document Properties palette over here at the right side. So on the Page tab, which is the very first tab of Document Properties, I'm going to change my display units to what I want to work with. I want to work with inches, but if you'd rather work with centimeters or pixels or millimeters, you can choose whichever one you like. I've changed mine to inches, and now under page size, I want to select the paper size that I'll be working with. I'll be working with US letter, which is 8.5 by 11, so I click the US letter 8.5 by 11. Once I have these settings changed, I can go ahead and close out of this Document Properties tab. So I'll just click that X and that goes away. And now you can see if we go to View, Zoom, and Zoom Page, we can see that our page is 8.5 by 11 and our design is sitting on that page. Another way to zoom in and out of the design is to use the magnifying glass icon at the bottom left. So I click the magnifying glass icon, and now I can click plus or minus on my keyboard to zoom in or to zoom out. When you're done with the zoom tool, make sure you go back into the select tool. That's the tool you're going to use most often. The select tool is this arrow tool at the top left. That allows you to select parts of your design. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in again. Zoom out just a little bit. There we go. Going back into my select tool. And now I'm going to show you how to change the size of your design. First, let's see what size the design is. So with the select tool activated, we want to select our entire design. There are a few ways you can do this. The first way is you can use the select tool and draw a box around the entire design. So you just click and drag and draw a box around the entire design. You want to make sure that everything is selected. If your box only goes partway into the design, it won't select everything. So I ended my box about here, so it actually only selected those pieces that were entirely within the design. So when you're drawing your box, just make sure you're all the way outside the edges of the design. The next way to select everything is to hold down your Control key on your keyboard, and if you're on a Mac, this will be your Command key, and then press the A key. So once again, you're going to hold down your Control or Command key, and then hold down the A key, and that selects everything. The last way to select everything is to go to Edit at the menu at the top, and then choose Select All, and that will also select everything. Now that the entire design is selected, at the very top, you're going to see width and height. Right now, these are kind of weird numbers because my measurements are in millimeters. It might be a different default measurement for you, so just change it to whatever you want to use. I want to use inches. So I have now changed my measurement unit to inches, and you'll see the width is 2.179 inches wide by 2.73 inches tall. Now, if this is the size I want, there's no need to change it, but let's say I want to make it bigger. Here is the first way to do that. So with the entire design still selected, I'm going to hold down my Control key on my keyboard, or if you're using a Mac, that's your Command key, and then I'm going to drag one of these arrows. And if you see, when I click and drag one of these arrows with the Control or Command key selected, I can make the design bigger or smaller proportionally. Now, let's say I don't hold down the Control key when I'm clicking and dragging these arrows. I can end up squashing or flattening my design. I don't usually want to do that. I usually want to keep the proportions the same, especially if it's a design that really depends on all the pieces fitting together in a certain way. You don't want to squish it or flatten it. So I'm just going to undo by doing Control Z. The other way to change the size of the design is, let's say I want this design a very specific size. Let's say I want it to be exactly 6 inches wide. Up at the top, we have our measurement units, and between them, there's this little icon. This is a little lock, and if you can see right now, it's yellow and sort of at an angle. That means the lock is unlocked. We want to lock the height and width. So we're going to click it, and now you can see that it's changed to kind of a little bit more darker golden color, and it's no longer slanted. This is locked. That means if we change the width here to 6 inches, our height will also change proportionally. So that's the other way you can change the size of the design, especially if you need it to be a certain size. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit. Now I'm going to show you how to change the colors of your design. Let's say I do want to print this design in color, but this is going to be for a birthday and not for Christmas, so I want to choose some more birthday appropriate colors. So what you're going to do is you're going to go back into your select tool. That's again that tool at the very top left. You're going to want to select everything in the design. I'm going to move it a little bit so it's within the page. And then after you select the design, you're going to go to the Object menu and you're going to choose Fill and Stroke. That's going to open up the Fill and Stroke palette. Fill is the color of each shape. So Fill is the very first tab, so you want to be on the very first tab. And then what you want to do is you want to click this second icon in. This first icon is an X. The second icon is your fill color. So we're going to choose that. We're going to deselect the design and we're going to just click on one portion of the design. And we're going to change the color using these 4 sliders. The first slider is hue. So if you want it red, green, blue, purple, let's say I want it kind of a magenta color. So I've slid my slider over to kind of the magenta area. The next is saturation. Right now it's 0, which is why it's totally black. But if you have your saturation up higher, it'll be brighter or darker. The next one is lightness. And again, it's totally black because it's totally dark. But if we up the lightness, that will change. Oh, hue accidentally got unset. There we go. So let's say I want something kind of in this area. The last one is alpha, which is opacity. Generally speaking, you always want to leave this at 100%, otherwise your colors are going to be transparent, which you don't usually want. So I've now changed the color of my first object. Next, I'm going to change the color of another part of the object. So I'm going to click off of the first part I selected and I'm going to click on the second part. So this is the other part of my bow. Let's say I want to make it a similar color, but not exactly the same. I can use this eyedropper tool, pick an existing color in the design, and now I can have that be the same color, but I want to change it a little bit. So I started with the same color, and now I'm going to make it a little bit brighter to create this kind of shading effect. So I'm going to click off the design again. I'm going to click another part of the design. And this time, let's say I want to make this box blue. So I'm going to pick blue over in my hues. I'm going to make the saturation a lot brighter and I want to make my brightness brighter. Let's see. I like it about there. So that's this side of my box. Next, I want to do the top of my box. I'm going to use the eyedropper tool because I want to start with this same blue and then I'm going to make it brighter because the light's hitting it from the top. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this side. I'm going to use my eyedropper tool, pick that same original blue, and this one I'm going to make a teeny bit darker for some shadows. All right, I now have the colors I want on my gift box and I can go ahead and print it. Now let's say rather than printing this in color, we actually want to cut this out by hand out of colored paper. So rather than printing 3 shades of blue, we're going to print it onto 3 different blue shades of paper. And likewise with the bow, we're going to do 2 different shades of purple paper. So we don't want the color to actually print, we just want the outlines so that we can cut it out. We're still going to use this fill and stroke palette over here, but this time we're going to add some outlines and change the color of these fills so that they're no longer a color. So we're again going to start by selecting the objects we want to change. This time we're going to make everything the exact same fill and line color, so we're just going to select everything. And then we're going to change the fill color to no color. So we're still going to be in this first fill tab, but rather than being a flat color, we're going to click the X. That's going to give it no color. And it looks like it disappeared. It's still there, it's just that it doesn't have a color and that's why we can't see it. Next, we're going to go to the Stroke Paint tab. So that's the next tab over. Right now, X is selected, meaning there is no stroke color. So we're going to actually click over to Flat Color. And now you can see it gave it a color for the outlines. It started out by giving it a black color, but let's say we want it to be not black. Let's say we want it to just be dark gray. We can move our sliders to whatever color we want it to be. So let's see, we have a nice dark gray there. And now let's say that we also don't want these lines to be quite that thick. We want just like a nice thin line. We can go to the Stroke Style tab up here. Currently the width is 0.029 inches. We can change that. Let's say I want to make it 0.01. And now the lines are nice and thin. And once I have the colors that I want for both the fill and the stroke, I can exit out of the fill and stroke palette by just clicking that X to get out of that window. Now let's say I'm still planning on printing this onto colored paper to cut out by hand, but I want the box to face this same way, but I want the print lines on the back. So even though I want the box to face this way, and if I want the print lines on the back, I'm going to have to mirror this design so that those lines are on the back. Or if you're doing iron-on transfer paper, you usually have to mirror the design, especially if it has words or something where it definitely needs to go a certain way. When you print it, you need to mirror it because it prints backwards, and then when you iron it on, it faces the right way. So in order to mirror the design, you need to select anything you want to flip. So I want to flip everything, so I'm going to draw a box around everything, or I can use one of the other methods for selecting everything that we talked about earlier. And then at the top, I want to choose the Flip Horizontally icon. So there's that tool right there, Flip Objects Horizontally, and if I click that, you see it flips the other way around. If I want to flip it back, I can do that. You can also use a keyboard shortcut to do the same thing. You just click H on your keyboard. Here it flips, H again, it flips back. So that's a little shortcut you can use as well. So I do want that flipped, so I have flipped the design. Now I'm ready to print the design. So once you've made all the changes and you're ready to print, make sure the objects are where you want them on the page. So I intend to print each individual object on a different color of paper. So I don't want them all to print at once like this, especially since you see my print lines are kind of overlapping. So I'm going to, using the Select tool, select each object one by one, and anything I don't want to print right now, I'm going to move it off of the page border. So this is my paper. Anything that's on this paper will print. So I'm just going to select things, move them off to the side so that only the objects that I am ready to print will be on the page. And I can move them around depending on where I want them to print on my page. So now that I have the object that I am ready to print, I can now go to File, Print, and then I can select whichever printer I want to use and click Print. Now that that's printed, I can move this one off and I can move on the next object that I want to print. So I'm going to move this one back onto the paper, and again, File, Print, choose your printer, click the Print button when you're ready to print. And you just keep repeating that process until each of these objects has been printed onto your paper. And then after it prints on the paper, I can cut around using these outlines. They'll be printed on the back because I mirrored it, so when I flip it over, you won't see any of the print lines. Our next step is saving our work. Now let's say I intend to use this exact same setup in the future, and I don't want to have to do all that work all over again. You can save your changes, but I recommend saving them as a new file name so that your original SVG is still intact, just in case. So what you do is go to File, Save As, and then you want to change the name of the file. So I'm going to change this to Gift Box Outlines. So now it has a new file name. It's not going to overwrite my old file. I can also save it to a different location on my computer. So if I don't want to save it in this same folder, I can pick a different location on my computer. So let's say I want to save that on my desktop. I can choose desktop and then save once I have everything set how I want it. This will save my SVG file with all of the changes that I made, but the original is still intact. So if I were to go to File, Open Recent, this is the original file that I had opened, the Giftbox SVG. You can see it's still the same. There are no changes applied because when I made my changes and saved it, I saved it under a new file name. If I want to visit the file I was just in, if I go down to the bottom bar, here's the new file I just opened, which was that original non-changed file, and here's the file that I was working on. And that's pretty much it. There is one more additional thing you can do, which is, let's say instead of saving this as an SVG, you would prefer to save this as a PNG or JPEG file. I'm actually going to go into the original color file we were working on just because that's going to be a little bit easier to show you. So I'm going back into this file that we started with originally. So let's say I want to save this, but I need it as a PNG or JPEG. So just like before, we're going to go ahead and open up whatever file we're wanting to save, or if we were already in the file, we just stay in the file. And now you're going to go to File, and then Document Properties. And then like before, we can change our display units if we want. I'm going to go ahead and change that to inches. And then we want to change our document size to match whatever we need for the final file. So let's say that I need it to be 1000 pixels by 1000 pixels. I'm going to go to custom size. My unit is already in pixels right now, so I can just change this to 1000 by 1000. And that's going to change my document size to be 1000 by 1000 pixels. Or let's say I want it to be in inches and I want it to be 8 by 8 inches. So I'm changing my units to inches, and I'm going to change the width and the height to inches under custom size. Now I have my design area set. I can go ahead and close out of the document properties palette. And if I were to zoom out, you can see that my document is 8 by 8. And like before, I can change my design to be whatever size I need it to be. And I can position it on the paper how I want it. I like it here, it's kind of centered. This is the size that I want. And as before, if I needed to change any colors, I could change the colors. The next thing we need to do is we need to set our background color. So to set our background color, you're going to go to File. We're going back into that same Document Properties palette. And this time we're going to go to the bottom here where it says Background. And it says background color. We're going to click this little color swatch. Now a new little window has opened up. This is similar to when we were changing the colors of the design. We have a hue palette, we have saturation, we have lightness, and we have alpha opacity. So let's say that I want a transparent background. I want to make sure that the alpha opacity is set to 0. 0 means it's going to be fully transparent. So this background, even though it looks white here, that's actually transparent. It's just that our workspace background is also white. Now let's say that I want a white background. I'm going to change the transparency and I'm going to bring it up to the maximum. So 100%. I'm going to go ahead and leave the lightness value at 100, and that will make my background as a white background. Let's say I want a black background. Again, I want my alpha transparency to be 100%. I want it to be fully opaque, but I'm going to change my lightness all the way down to 0. So that will give me a black background. Let's say that I want my background to be a specific color and I have the hex code. So down here at the right, at the bottom of this window, you'll see a hex number. Let's say I know what my hex number is. I can put my hex number in here. So I'm going to change this to be what I have the hex number. So let's say I know my hex number is 3D, 3D, 3D. Then the last 2 digits, that's my transparency. I want to have that as FF. That means it's fully opaque. So if I do 3D, 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 FF, that is this color. But whatever my hex color is, I would just put that in this RGBA box and then add FF to the end to make sure that it's opaque. I could also use the eyedropper tool and pick something from the design and then use the sliders to kind of manually make a color. So let's say I kind of want that and something like this, and that's the color that I want for the background. Now, once we have the background color set, I can close out of this little window. I can close out of my document properties. And now I'm going to go to File, Export PNG Image. Now at the top, you're going to choose either Page, Drawing, or Selection. And each of these will act differently depending on what you want to do. I'll describe each of them. If you have Page selected, this will create an image file of only the things within the page boundaries, and the total size will equal the total size of the page area. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see. So here I have my page area, and if I have Page selected, that means that my image is going to be this entire thing, including even these white areas. Now, if you want something not to be included in the file, you can move it by using your select tool. If you move it, oops, unfortunately I still had it selected, sorry. If I move this off, that's not going to be part of the image that I save. It's only going to be what's inside of my page boundaries. The next is Drawing. So for Drawing, this will create an image file of all of the elements within the document, even if you have them moved off the page. So my image is going to be this and this. The last one is Selection. Selection will create an image out of only the items that I have selected. So anything within the dashed lines. Right now, I just have this selected. So if I were to save it as Selection right now, this would be the only thing that would be in the image. If I drew a line around that, only the item that's selected, which right now is this, is going to be what the image is. So choose whichever one of these is going to work best for you. I'm going to go ahead and do Page. I'm going to put this back where it goes. And I'm going to put this back where it goes also, because I want everything within the page to go ahead and be on the image file. So I'm going to select Page here, make sure that I'm in the right one, because sometimes if you click away, it's going to try and make you do Selection. You want to make sure that you're in whichever one you actually want to be in. So I'm going to click Page, and then I am going to go down to where it says Image Size. And if you see by DPI, there's going to be a number here. This DPI is important whether you are printing this PNG or JPEG image, or if you're just going to use it for screen. If you plan on printing the image, you want it to be 300 DPI because that's what the printer needs for a nice high resolution. So if you're printing, make the DPI 300. If you're just going to use the image for screen, it doesn't need to be printed, change it to 96. All right, so depending on what application you're doing, you're either going to do 300 for printing or 96 for screen. Once you have your DPI set, you're then going to click Export As. You're going to choose the file name that you want to give it, and you're going to choose the location where you want your file to go. So I'm going to call this gift box. I want this on my desktop. And then last, Save as Type. You can either choose PNG or you can choose JPEG. Now keep in mind, if you have a transparent background, transparency does not work with JPEG images. If you want the background to be transparent, you have to do a PNG. My background is this green color. I did not set it as transparent, so I could do either one. But let's say I had the background transparent, I have to do a PNG, because if I were to save it as a JPEG, that transparent's just going to change to white. It's not going to be transparent anymore. So PNG if you have any transparency, JPEG if you don't care about transparency. And then I just click Save, and then the file is going to export to the location that I saved it as. And now, like before, if you wish to save the SVG file with these particular settings, we recommend saving it under a different name so that the original remains intact. So instead of doing File Save, do File Save As and give it a different name. I know we covered a lot in this video, but once you do it a few times, you'll get the hang of it, and you can always refer back to this video or to the written instructions if you need a refresher on anything. I'll also put chapters marked in the description if you want to jump ahead to a specific section. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. We hope you liked this video. Please comment, like, and subscribe.